7th grade. We are going to start something new here with this week. And we would normally start a new unit with vocabulary with me there in the classroom, but we can't do that this time. So the first thing I want you to do is either print off the vocabulary sheet that is in this email if you haven't done so, or you can just write the words down on a normal piece of paper. This is what it looks like. Okay, so this is the first page, 3D figures, all of that. Okay, looks a little different than what our vocab looks like. And then we have the second sheet, which is parts of a three-dimensional figure. So we're going to talk about the types of 3D figures and then the parts. There's going to be a lot of note-taking, so you are going to want to pause and rewind this video as needed, okay? Before I get to this, before we talk about 3D figures, let's talk about two-dimensional figures so we can truly understand a three-dimensional figure. A two-dimensional figure is basically something that I can draw on a piece of paper or a board. Now, I know technically we can draw 3D figures, but those are just representations of 3D figures. So 2D figures do not take up space in my house. Whether I erase these or draw these on here, there is no difference in the space that's being taken up in my house right now. Okay, so they don't take up space. They have two dimensions, you know, base and height, length and width, that's it. Okay? A three-dimensional figure is defined, write this down, as something that takes up space. So, my Diet Coke bottle, this takes up space in my house right now. This is a three-dimensional figure. Believe it or not, this piece of paper, it looks two-dimensional, but it does have a little bit of depth, and it takes up space in my room. I have a bunch of three-dimensional figures down here that I'm going to show you in a minute. But a three-dimensional figure is something that takes up space. It has that third dimension. So while a rectangle is length and width, your rectangular solid, your three-dimensional figure, has length, width, and height. It has that third dimension. So for example, I need to find my rectangular prism. This is a rectangular prism. Length, width, and height, or depth as some may call it. So it takes up space in my room right now. So there are 5 main types of three-dimensional figures. Prisms, you can see it on your sheet, cylinders, pyramids, cones, and spheres. So the first thing I'm going to talk about are prisms. Okay, I'm going to give you a bunch of examples of prisms right here that I'm going to pull out. Okay. This is a three-dimensional prism. This is a prism, 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 prism. Okay, what makes something a prism is that it has two base shapes that are connected. Okay, so for example, this three-dimensional figure has two bases of the squares. Okay, those are the two bases. Now, base does not mean bottom. So right now, my bases are top and bottom. They're front or back. They're left or right. Okay, so your base shapes are squares, and those two squares are connected, which makes it three-dimensional. Here, I have two triangles that are connected. Whether I hold it like this, or this, it's the two triangles that are connected to create this space in the middle, and now I have a three-dimensional figure. So this is called a rectangular prism because the bases are rectangles. This is called a triangular prism because the base shapes are triangles. Okay. This is called a hexagonal prism. Again, it's a prism because it has two base shapes. Hexagonal because, you guessed it, the base shapes are hexagons. So those are examples of prisms. This is a very specific type of prism. You guys probably all know what this is. This is a cube, right? A cube is a type of rectangular prism because its base shapes are squares, but you don't really know which two are the base because they're all exactly the same size. They're all squares. Versus this prism, which the base shapes are squares, but you can see that all the middle shapes definitely are more than squares. They're rectangles. So those are all prisms. It means you have two base shapes that are polygons. Okay, polygon being your triangle, your quadrilateral, hexagon, heptagon, pentagon, octagon, nonagon, decagon, all that stuff we talked about already. Okay, then we have the cylinder. The cylinder is in the same family as the prism. The cylinder has two base shapes as well, except this time the base shapes are circles. So instead of being a polygon, something with sides and edges, your base shapes are circles. So your cylinders are two circles that are connected. So here's a couple examples of cylinders. You know, your cup that you might be drinking out of is a cylinder. It's usually two circles. So cylinders and prisms are in the same family in that they are both three-dimensional figures made up of two base shapes. Prisms, their base shapes are polygons. Okay, so hexagon, triangle, quadrilateral. And cylinders, your base shapes are always circles, but it's two of them. Okay? Then our next three-dimensional figure is the pyramid. So a pyramid is a three-dimensional shape. Unlike the prism, it has only one base. Okay? So I have one base shape. I have one base shape. Okay? One base shape. So instead of two bases, it has one. Now that base, like the prism, that base is a polygon. So here I have a triangle and a square. Those are the only examples I have. But the base could be a pentagon, a hexagon, whatever. But instead of being connected to another base, like the prism, it's connected to this point at the top, called the vertex. Okay? So you have a base shape connected to a vertex. Base shape connected to a vertex. So you can see here is what we call a square prism because the base, or square pyramid because the base is a square and it's a pyramid. Here's a square prism. As you can see, they both have bases that are squares, but this one connects to another square and this one connects to a vertex. So that's your difference between a prism and a pyramid. And these are the pyramids like you see when you think of the pyramids in Egypt. Okay, a base shape of a polygon connected to a vertex. Here, my base shape is a triangle connected to a vertex. So that's what a pyramid is. Your cone, you guys all know what a cone is. Birthday hat, right? A cone is in the same family as pyramid because it has one base shape that is connected to a vertex. However, the base shape is a circle and not a polygon. Okay, so cylinder, base shape was a circle, but it was connected to another circle. A cone, my base shape is a circle, but it's connected to a vertex. Okay, so if you think of your waffle cones from Dairy Queen, they look like this. You know, your birthday hat, your dunce hat, things like that I talked about before. So that's what a cone is. So those are 4 of our types of polygons. And you can kind of see just by what I went through there quickly, how they are alike and how they are similar based on their base shapes, how many base shapes they have, and what they're connected to. All of them are three-dimensional because they take up space in my house right now. And then the last three-dimensional figure on your sheet is the sphere. The sphere is very, very different from the other 4 types that I just went over. The sphere is just a three-dimensional circle. In fact, if you look up the definition of a circle and the definition of a sphere on Google or in your book or whatever, you're going to see that they are almost identical. The difference being the circle we'll talk about being on a plane, which is what makes it two-dimensional, and the sphere is in space. Again, takes up space. That's what makes it three-dimensional. It has a radius and a diameter, just like a circle does. Okay, there is no base shape. Okay, if you think the base shape is a circle, you're wrong. Anything with the base shape of a circle is either a cylinder or a cone. A sphere has no base shape. That's what makes it very, very different from the other 4 three-dimensional figures we talked about. Okay, and then cube is your last word on this front sheet, and we already talked about a cube. It is a type of prism. It's just a very specific type of prism where all of the two-dimensional shapes on there are the same. Okay, if you need to pause or rewind, go ahead and do so now, because now I'm going to go to this sheet, which is the parts of a three-dimensional figure. Okay, so the first word on there is face. A face